Hello and welcome to episode 27, we think, of 41 Files. It's run together so much because we've been able to be so successful with this podcast, and it's really taken off quickly, and we've been excited about people listening to it as much as they have. Thank you for subscribing, for listening, for telling your friends about it. If you haven't done those things, do them today. We've got great things to talk about today, several topics we're going to include, including 41 Action News reporter Kat Reed, who joins us by phone while walking her dog. Hi, Kat.
Hello.
I let out your secret that you're out on a dog walk.
Yes, you did.
My 41 Action News Today co-anchor, Lindsay Shively, here with us this morning.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone.
Also, fellow morning compatriot, Charlie Keegan, in studio with us this morning. Hi, Charlie.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
What a radio voice that was.
I amped it up, didn't I?
Keegan's Golden Pipes.
That's right. 41 Action News Trivia. I call Charlie Chaz when we're not on camera. And have almost called him that in several live shot pitches.
That's true.
On 41 Action News Today. 41 Action News reporter Charlie Keegan, just so you know. And then Haley is in the room too, but Haley does not. Haley's our digital producer. Haley does not speak.
Look,
she does not like to appear on
she's
camera.
nodding no.
She is shaking her
"Stop
head
it."
violently. Do not reference me. It's like I'm not even here. So we have several topics to talk about today, and because Kat is out walking her dog, we'll begin with her. Kat, you had a big story this week because you were able to secure an exclusive interview with Kansas City Councilman Quinton Lucas, also mayoral candidate in Kansas City, Quinton Lucas, after a pretty eventful weekend for him last week, after he was arrested in Lawrence. Talk us through what happened for people who aren't familiar with Quinton Lucas's case. What happened with him? What's he accused of?
Yes. So it was Thursday night. The councilman says that he was at a university event in Lawrence and then at a kind of post-event gathering. He got to his car and says that he realized he couldn't drive safely back to Kansas City. And so he was kind of sitting there when he says he dozed off. And then Lawrence police came by and they, found him asleep in the car, and they arrested him on suspicion of DUI.
So obviously this is still this is still kind of in process because as we learned from him this week that he's thinking, as he told you in his interview, that he's thinking that he will be exonerated of any of those charges. But as we get into what we're talking about here, I'm curious, and I think that a lot of people would be as well. We had the exclusive interview with him. You had the exclusive interview with him. He spoke to you first this week. Why did he talk to you? How did you reach out? How did you make that connection?
Yeah, well, I think that we have kind of an ongoing relationship with Councilman Lucas, and so does Steve Cott on our assignment desk. And so we talk to him pretty frequently and have kind of built up that relationship and talked to him about a lot of things. So I reached out to him, and I think he felt comfortable talking with us because of all of the previous stories we've done and that relationship we've kind of built up. And I told him, that it was a situation where everyone wants to talk to him, and they're going to talk to him at some point, whether that's in the middle of a city council meeting or, right before or after.
Kat, I know one of the interesting pieces from your story that came out is that in Lawrence, where he was arrested, you pointed out that attempting to operate a motor vehicle is part of that arrest. Is that right?
Yes. So in Kansas, actually, under driving under the influence statute, it is operating or attempting to operate a motor vehicle. And here's where there's some disagreement. The councilman says that there are several recent Supreme Court and Court of Appeals cases that would say operate or attempting to operate means movement of the car. And the councilman maintains that he never moved the car. It was always parked legally in the spot. So that's kind of the issue that he's debating and the reason why he thinks that this will all be dismissed.
One thing that he was not clear about with you, at least best I can tell, is that we still don't know for certain if the car was running. Is that correct? That's not something he would answer for you?
Yeah, he said that he would kind of let everything come out as the legal process, moves forward. But in the dispatch, scanners traffic, you can hear them say that there's a subject unconscious in a running car. So at least police dispatchers on their end said that the car was running, but that was not something that he wanted to address at this point.
As we listened to your interview play out a couple of mornings ago, the day after you were able to have that interview, when we were listening to it on 41 Action News today, Lindsay and I both commented to each other that he seemed very confident, very calm with what was happening, especially for a person who is running for higher office. To have something like this happen, it seems like it could really derail his chances. He did not, at least in his interview with you, seem to portray that. How did he seem to you, even off camera, as far as how he feels about how this affects his political future moving forward?
He seemed very calm to me as well, and really feels like this is going to be dismissed. And I asked him, the full interview did not air, obviously, because we have about 2 minutes. But one of the things I asked him was, does this impact your ability to govern? And I also asked him, does this hurt your mayoral chances? And he kind of said, I think people will realize that this was a misunderstanding. I think it'll be dismissed. And he said, I think people will look at everything I've done in Kansas City and my work and will be able to move forward.
And Kat, this is after the mayoral race has been shaken up pretty significantly recently, with Jason Kander deciding to step out of the race and coming forward and saying he needed to take care of dealing with PTSD, and Jolie Justice coming back in the picture. From talking to other people around City Hall or even around the city, are you getting the idea that this had an effect, maybe even if he doesn't believe that it did?
I don't think that people feel like it has a huge effect. I think the one thing that people have pointed out is that even if it gets dismissed, there's still the mugshot out there, which, if someone chose to use that in an attack campaign, that would be pretty bad. But I'm hearing from a lot of people that now that she's back in, Jolie is really the favorite and the one to watch in the mayoral race. But it has been a really wacky couple of months in that race that, obviously doesn't even happen. The primary isn't even until next spring.
Right. We're way before the primary still.
And we've already had major things in this race happen. Both of you just referenced some of those as far as candidates that we did not expect to be in, and Kander coming into it. He was a late addition to the race as far as, when compared to some of the other people that had thrown their hat in the ring. Then for him to drop out unexpectedly, Jolie to get back in. Now this. We have several months until the primary happens, and we don't even know what could be next in this race, with 9 candidates that are running for mayor in Kansas City, Quinton Lucas being just one of them, and just one of several city council members that are running for mayor for Kansas City. So it will be interesting to see what's next. Kat, before we let you go, do we have any kind of timeline on what the next step in this might be, as far as when we expect something to be dismissed, or when we expect any kind of court appearances from him, that kind of thing? What's next for Quinton Lucas?
Well, he said that he believes that the issue could be resolved as soon as this week. So we'll be, of course, checking in on that and seeing where things stand.
Okay, so as we record this podcast, it's Wednesday morning, so we'll see if something could come down as soon as today or the next couple of days before the week is over, and see if we get a resolution in what happened with Quinton Lucas and his arrest in Lawrence from last week. Kat Reed joining us, 41 Action News reporter. Kat, thank you so much for taking time out and talking to us today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Kat. Say hi to Rosie for us.
I will.
Rosie the doggy.
She's Twitter famous.
She's adorable is what she is.
How is she Twitter famous? Do I need to be following Rosie? I didn't realize that was a thing.
Well, she doesn't have her own account, but I just feel like Eddie and her, I tweet a lot about Rosie, and she always gets more likes than anything else I do.
She's so cute.
It's always the way.
Yeah.
I could say whatever I want about whatever story we're talking about, then just post a random picture of my kids and bing, 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 bing. Well, okay, super.
Yeah, well, they're pretty cute, too.
Well, that goes without saying.
Thanks, Kat.
But I don't walk them the same way. It's different.
Yeah, no. Okay, I'll touch you guys later.
Bye, Kat. So we continue with 41 Files today and talking about several different stories you may have seen on our air in the last few days. And next up is my co-anchor, Lindsay Shively, with a story she's been working on for months. We got our first chapter of it several months ago, and then an update this week, and that is the Hyperloop that could be a real possibility for the state of Missouri. What's going on with Hyperloop?
And that's the way we keep phrasing it, because, of course, it's not like we can say, it's coming, it's for sure, you know. So in April, we went to Virgin Hyperloop One's test site in Las Vegas. They have a test track there where they've reached several hundred miles per hour, 200-something odd miles per hour with their test track. And what just came out was the first feasibility study completed in the U.S. of Missouri's route, which is a huge step because being the first feasibility study really puts us pretty far ahead.
Sure. Now, are we the first? We're the first feasibility study to be completed that this area could work, and that's what that part of the study said. Absolutely, this is perfect for what we're trying to do. Are there other areas that feasibility studies are being conducted right now and just haven't had anything come out yet?
Absolutely, and they expect a couple to be finished by the end of the year, so they're not too far behind. This is all happening pretty simultaneously. Ohio is one of them. Colorado is one of them. And the barriers to those other tracks that what kind of sets us apart that Hyperloop One has always talked about is our straight shot, flat route between Kansas City and St. Louis, right along I-70, which provides a right of way, and that has been a huge bonus for us, and one of the reasons we have been told that we have such a real shot.
Absolutely. So the two big numbers, at least, that stuck out to me from this study, and I think to a lot of people when this came out and part of your report this week, or late last week, excuse me, was the time it would take potentially if this works out to get from Kansas City to St. Louis, which was under 30 minutes to drive one way or to ride one way.
Yeah.
And the cost associated, which I did not expect them to include in this feasibility study as far as, because I think it said something in the neighborhood of about $30 per ticket one way to go.
Yeah.
Were you expecting them to put a dollar figure on what that might include to be able to make that ride? Because I was surprised by that.
And I just asked, not expecting to get an answer, and they really honed in on that. They had said back in April about the price, I think they said of a train ticket. It was going to be cheaper than it was going to be to fly. But then they came this time and said about $30 each way. We really think that's what it would be.
Did that surprise you to hear it that low? I mean, I know it surprised me. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that.
I think that's a game changer for a lot of people who thought it would not be something they could hop on at a moment's notice.
Sure. And so that mixed with the fact that I could get from Kansas City to St. Louis in less than half an hour with a stop in Columbia potentially as well, is where the other stop would be.
In 15 minutes.
In 15 minutes is really something. I was talking about it with people outside of work that were asking me questions about it if they'd seen your report. And they were talking about, think about how many options that opens up for people who want to live in one city and work in the other one. As far as, I mean, now that's, if you're talking about $60 a day to go back and forth, but if you have a job where you're not going into work every day, if you're working from home and you have to go into the office once a week, that kind of thing, it takes a 4-hour trip one way down to a 30-minute trip one way. It's a complete different way of life, potentially.
Or think about with the university in the middle, which was also a big boon for our route because they like the idea of technology and education and being a source for that and all innovation. But also, you don't have to take a college class every day to take a full schedule. So all of a sudden, what if you could get to Mizzou from either Kansas City or St. Louis and not have to pay to live there?
Absolutely. And I would think that the number of people who attend Mizzou who are either from Kansas City or from St. Louis is high. I would think that's a big part of their student population as far as people that live in and around those two cities. Being able to commute back and forth like that on a more relative basis, and at least on a speedier basis, would really be something.
And what does that do if maybe one class at UMSL is more geared toward what you want to do, or one class at UMKC? You really could take advantage of the system, which is one of the reasons the chancellor is on the Hyperloop Coalition. We were talking to the president of the KC Tech Council, Ryan. He also believes, I thought this was interesting, that there's a possibility this could make it more attractive for people to run for office. Jeff City is less than a half-hour drive south of Columbia, but you try to do that back and forth in one day driving, it's a little much.
It's a lot.
If you could do it in 30 minutes to an hour, maybe it's more attractive.
Absolutely. And I'm curious about, because the quick comparison too was, and obviously this is not something we have an answer to yet, but even the mind just kind of reels thinking about, what about this? What about this? How does it affect this? I thought about, people were talking about comparing it to the cost of a tank of gas, potentially to make that drive. How does, if we're living in a world with Hyperloop tracks pretty soon, how does that affect gas prices? Where we're talking about, that's got to become a more competitive industry where, you know what, I don't have to ride in my car anymore. I'm going to hop on the Hyperloop and go, oh, your gas is less expensive? Well, maybe I'll think about it. There's just so many things that could be affected if this becomes a thing, which leads me to my next question, because this is just step one.
Right.
Step one is, yep, we can do it. This makes perfect sense to make this place happen. Step two is, How do we pay for it?
Right, right. And again, kind of what they reiterated what they had thought back when we visited them in April, that this is going to have to be, at the very least, a public-private partnership. And they did not give us an exact estimate of what they believe this will cost. They have some idea, but that includes several asterisks, as you can imagine, because they don't know where the stations would be. Will they be in the city center? Will they hook up to the airport? How many cars will be there? But it will be in the billions.
I was about to say it includes several asterisks and several commas, I would think, as well.
And a
at the same
B.
time. Yeah, there's lots of numbers that go into that. For the people that did not see your study or see your report, what's next as far as figuring that out? We got that first half done now. Where does the money report start to happen when we start to have an answer of what that might look like?
So the president of the KC Tech Council, who's on the Hyperloop Coalition, says now it is on the Missouri Hyperloop Coalition to figure out that financial package, what that might look like. And they say that will take more than a year. So they've given themselves, not a deadline necessarily, but saying it's going to take some time because this has never been done before. He's the same person to say, I fully expect that this would be, because also another part that's a boon for us, we're centrally located in the country. This would be a great, easy beginning for a nationwide network. And he wants to be the guy that goes skiing in his home for dinner in
Absolutely.
Denver and back in Kansas City.
Yeah, that
Wild.
would be something.
Wild possibilities.
There's also been some confusion a little bit, both in our newsroom and outside, as far as now which company is this? Because this is not the only Hyperloop
No.
being talked about. This one is Virgin Hyperloop, but there's other companies. Elon Musk has one that he's trying to do as well. There's lots of other possibilities being factored into this as well.
There are several companies. So when you hear about what Elon Musk is doing, that is separate from what Virgin Hyperloop One is doing. And, this all started without the absolute timeline in front of me. Elon Musk wrote a paper about this several years ago. And the person who started Virgin Hyperloop One kind of worked with him on deciding to move forward with this. And then Elon Musk then later decided to get back in the game. Apart from his other companies that he's working on, trying to go to Mars and electric cars and all that. He's a very busy guy. But it's so interesting to see the different stages. Virgin Hyperloop One says they believe they are the furthest along in proving this with their test track. And it's also interesting to try to explain to people how Hyperloop works.
Yeah.
It's a vacuum tube. They think it can go upwards of 700 miles per hour. They believe they've proven the technology, and it electromagnetically levitates. The pod does.
Charlie
over the
Keegan is
track.
shaking his head right now over in the corner going, that's wild.
Yeah, hard to believe.
Science fiction is what it always feels like, but the scientists we talked to who helped land a rover on Mars is like, no, it's not. It's science fact.
Yeah,
Here it is.
she said in your original report, because you said it feels like science fiction, and she pointed at the tube and said, nope, because there it is right there.
There it is.
That was my last question, I think, for you before we end this topic was, do you have any way of knowing what's still going on out there at the test track now that they've completed this? What are they still testing? Do you know what's going on out there at Las Vegas? Have any idea?
I will say, I asked them, I said, do you have a new speed test update, or are there any other developments I need to know about since I was last out there? And they kind of laughed and said, not that we're going to tell you about.
Right. Top secret. Need to know basis.
It's very proprietary, as you
Sure,
can imagine.
absolutely.
Every advancement is key.
That's so interesting. Like I said, there's just so many questions that any person, no matter what their profession is, their level of interest, their level of intelligence, that you could explain this to a child and they'd go, huh, what, huh, where? And there's so many questions about it that this story brings up. So if you haven't had a chance, go to kshb.com. Lindsay's report from last week is up there, and also from several months ago when she did the initial report. And that was back in May, I think, is when you went.
April
Or May?
Spring.
Back in the springtime when you visited the test track outside Las Vegas. That's definitely worth a watch, too. I love that story. So go and watch both of those and get yourself up to speed, so to speak. Thanks, Linz. Okay, continuing 41 Files today. Charlie Keegan is in studio with us for a rare podcast appearance. We're so glad that Charlie's here with us.
Yeah,
I'm jealous
looking forward to
that your microphone was set up so much higher than mine. You and I are both tall people.
We sure are.
I am sitting down and stooped in half to speak into this microphone. Charlie is sitting up completely straight.
Are you okay over there?
No,
Tyler? Okay.
Any way I can complain, I'm going to take that opportunity.
Posture is everything in this podcast, business.
Clearly,
And I have the adjustable chair because I'm.
right.
They're too tall and too short for me. And I have
The
adjustable.
pregnant woman in the corner has the most comfortable seating in the room, and she makes sure of that. I would too. So
Well deserved.
Charlie's here to talk about something called the Rock Island Corridor. Now, this story I think aired on Mondays when you first did this story.
Correct.
So I was not here on Monday, so I didn't catch it and have since watched it. But my first kind of showcasing of the story or seeing it was Lindsay showed it to me the next day when I got back. She said, "You have to see this tunnel."
Right.
That Charlie did the story about.
The Vail Tunnel.
Yeah, tell people about the tunnel and what the Rock Island Corridor is.
Well, the Rock Island Corridor is a former railroad line operated by the Rock Island Railroad Company out of Illinois that went abandoned in the 80s and sat vacant ever since. But when it was still a railroad, it went underneath Bannister Road in the south side of Kansas City. And to go underneath Bannister Road, it had a tunnel that it went through. And it was called the Vail Tunnel, because I guess that part of the city was actually the township of Vail. It was a V-A-L-E.
V-A-L-E, okay.
And it's a 453-foot long tunnel that goes under Bannister Road. And it's going to be like the landmark element of this new trail. They're turning the old railroad into a biking and walking trail. And you'll be able to walk and bike right underneath the tunnel and go through it and kind of think about, oh, man, back in the day, the trains would go through here. They are putting lights in it because it looks a little
It does not
scary.
look a little anything. It's terrifying to look at.
Yeah.
Did it live up to the hype when I told you
Yes.
this looks like
Absolutely. You said
scary movie.
you've got to see this tunnel that Charlie talked about. It's terrifying. I was like, I can't be. And then she showed me the picture, and I said, nope.
Yeah. Well,
So, but 453 feet.
you can see it's a straight line, though. You can see the end. So there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Every scary tunnel you can see the end of, because that's the draw of the scary tunnel. It's just, I can get
It
out there
lures you
quickly.
in.
I can see the end, no problem, and then you don't make it out.
Well, I tell you, I was there. I videotaped it, and I felt no fear whatsoever.
Well, you're a brave guy,
I
Charlie.
guess so, yeah. And I had the project coordinator with me. I figured nothing could happen to him, so I'm safe.
It's like having your father with you at bedtime. Everything's fine. It's okay. Totally okay. Dad's telling me a story, and no monsters here because Dad's in the room. So,
Yeah, exactly.
What's the timeline of getting this complete is not long, right? They're hoping to do this pretty quickly.
Right, they've got a couple of phases going with this. They've got about 15 miles of railroad that they're converting, and the first 7, they split into 2 phases, about 7 miles each. The first phase of 7 miles should be open, by the end of November, probably before Thanksgiving. We're taking bets on Lindsay's Baby or the Rock Island Corridor, which will happen first.
Put me on the baby side. That's what I think is going to happen first.
That's a good bet. I'd be mad if you voted the other way.
And then they're going to start construction work on the second phase, like in February of next year, and that'll take about 10 months, and maybe by like January of 2020, the full 15-mile phase will be open and operating. But what people are most excited about is the possibility of this trail connecting Kansas City to the Katy Trail.
Yes.
Now,
Okay.
you're thinking Katy, Texas.
Right, I'm
It's
like,
spelled the same way,
Spelled
because
the
you're
same,
not
right.
from here. Katy. It's a trail that goes across the entire state of Missouri, from St. Charles, Missouri, over near St. Louis, across through like Sedalia, and Roachport is like a really well-known spot
Yes.
along the Missouri River where this trail is.
Okay.
And it ends in Pleasant Hill, which is like just outside of Kansas City, so not too far. They've extended it slowly and
But
surely
basically
west.
the entire state. I
But
mean,
basically the entire state, yeah. And it's incredibly popular. There's little like mom and pop bed and breakfasts along the trail, and these bicyclists who want to bike the entire state will stop and stay at these bed and breakfasts, and really they're supported by the bicyclists who use this trail. So it's a pretty big draw. And so from the end of the Rock Island Corridor to the end of the Katy Trail in Pleasant Hill is 8 miles. So now we'd have like an 8-mile gap that we just need to close to connect it all together and bring the Katy Trail to Kansas City once and for all. And Jackson County is working with federal partners and
To make that
applying for
happen.
grants and looking at what they can do. Like I said, the Rock Island Trail is a former railroad that they are easily converting into a trail.
Right.
But the railroad that goes from the end of the Rock Island to the end of the Katy Trail is still an active railroad.
Oh, okay.
So they can't just
Oh.
claim that railroad
Yeah.
again. So they have to find their own route now. And that makes it a little more difficult.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, go through neighborhoods or cross streets and things like that in interesting ways.
Ugh, that would be such a big deal. I have a very lovely memory of my dad driving to Mizzou and us biking 9 miles from Columbia to Roachport,
Yeah.
taking a little break and having lunch, and then biking back like feet from the river bluffs next
Yep.
to you and the river right there.
The Missouri River.
It really is. It's magical. Could not walk for 3 days. That's a lot to bike.
Yeah, that is a lot to bike. And we would do the same thing. We grew up in Kansas City. We'd go out to Roachport, just park the car, and it's a real scenic part of the Katy Trail right there. Ride your
Yeah.
bikes around. I remember we'd always get a treat when we were kids. We would get the sarsaparilla from the little dollar store in Roachport. It was such a moment.
Mind blown here. I mean, that all of that is like, yep, that sounds right. I can picture 6-year-old Charlie Keegan with a sarsaparilla. That just, I mean,
We were just talking about sarsaparilla because Taylor's not had sarsaparilla.
never.
And loves root beer.
I do love root beer.
Therefore, you would be a sarsaparilla fan.
No
Okay.
doubt about it.
Okay.
You're
So
a sassafras kind of guy.
So it's been said. So just so I'm clear, I feel like most of our listeners will be like, well, what is this guy? Again, I'm not from here. So the Katy Trail is completely not, you can't have any kind of motorized vehicle on it. That's just for bikes and walking and running and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As far as I know, yeah.
I think so. And parts of it really are just inches from the, not inches, but very close.
very
to
close
the
to the
river.
river.
Alongside.
And very pretty.
That's really interesting.
And I got one more thing to say about
Please.
this Rock Island Trail. It gets a little more complicated. The second phase is going to go from the Truman Sports Complex south through Raytown to Brickyard Road, which is kind of like an odd road in Knobtown. If you guys know where Knobtown is, 350 Highway and Nolan Road, basically from there to the Truman Sports Complex. But during that section of the trail, they're going to build the walking trail right next to the old railroad and leave the railroad bed open because Kansas City Area Transit Authority is interested in possibly using that existing rail bed for some sort of new transit opportunity, whether it be a max type of bus or maybe a streetcar
expansion, I was about to say,
expansion.
yeah.
You could go the streetcar maybe from like Linwood to the stadiums, along Linwood from Main Street to the stadiums, and then a new one from the stadiums to Knobtown.
That's a big deal.
Right.
So when you first started this story the other day, I wondered, I was like, what about the train from the stadium? So, I mean, they've talked about that for a couple years now, right?
Right? Yeah.
What is the latest with...
Well, it gets complicated because there's some sort of federal rule where you can't just have a train stop at a stadium only on game days because then because the stadium needs to get revenue from parking and stuff. But if a train constantly passes by the stadium on a routine route, then it can stop at the stadium on every day, including game day. So I guess they kind of have to establish an everyday route that includes the stadiums and not just a special chartered train.
So it has to continue on.
And when you factor in, we've been talking about this summer, the World Cup's looking at Kansas City, obviously, for one of the places. And one of the places where we scored low was transportation. That's one of the places where we did not do well as far as getting people from point A to point B in Kansas City out to where the match would likely be held at Arrowhead if the World Cup were to come here. So I'm sure that's something that's being considered in here, too, is, hey, we've got to be able to get people out there more efficiently. This could be a way to do it. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You have to have do you have to get the streetcar to a certain point? I mean,
Yeah.
wow.
On a regular routine basis.
Interesting. And what did you say from the stadium to where's the furthest point the Rock Island train would go?
Yeah, so once it's all finished, it'll go from the stadium to Lee Summit, at the intersection-ish of Jefferson Street and 291 Highway, on the southern side of Lee Summit.
I wonder how close that is because downtown Lee Summit has a train station and Amtrak station that's pretty frequently
yeah.
used.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Lindsay's connecting the dots.
Interesting.
I love watching the two of you that grew up in Kansas City just go back and forth, describe this thing. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, right. That sounds good. All that sounds good. They're excited. I'm excited.
We're bringing you into the loop,
It feels that way.
the Hyperloop.
The first time I rode Amtrak and it stopped in Lee Summit, I was like, look how downtown Lee Summit is fabulously charming.
It really is. I have been there. That's really, really nice because I went there for a school talk earlier this year, or I guess late last year, to talk at one of the elementary schools there. And so we got to go to Lee Summit. It really is beautiful down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the same thought, though, Lindsay, when I took the Amtrak to St. Louis. I was like, oh, Lee Summit's kind of got some stuff going on here.
Yes, they do. They do. Good job, Lee Summit.
Charlie Keegan, thanks so much for telling us more about the possibilities and illuminating what could be a scary trail. I appreciate that.
Right, they're putting lights in it before they open.
I'm sure they expressed that to you many, many times.
Yeah.
It looks creepy. There will be lights. Don't worry.
I saw the equipment there.
Lindsay told me we should, before Halloween, just go out there and tie red balloons all around that spot.
You can't tell. I'd say those things to you, not for the podcast.
No, we're telling it.
Total confidence.
That's what we should do. Yeah, no one's listening. It's fine. No, don't record that part.
We will not put balloons up there. That is cruel.
If it happens, it was not us.
Yeah.
Okay, now you get to leave this one on the burglary file.
Park, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And now another chapter in a story Taylor has been working on for several months about a crime that really a lot of people might not know ever happened in Overland Park 50 years ago, right, Taylor?
Yep, 50 years ago this year, January of 1968 was when it originally happened. It was a bombing, bank robbery, and fatal shootout in Overland Park 50 years ago this year.
And after you did the first story, kind of weaving the tale, you had a lot of people reach out.
Oh my gosh, there was so many people that said, "Oh, I remember that. Oh, we were here. Oh, I remember when my mom was driving past." Because Overland Park 50 years ago was not near the size, obviously, that it is now. Now Overland Park is a city of 180,000 people, and when I would look at some of the photos from then, some of the descriptions from then, it felt like small town America. Some of the places where they're looking through. So just kind of telling this story, because when the story was first told to me by a city employee, he said, "I can't wait until you do the story, because the number of people who work for the city that don't know about this, they're just going to be shocked this ever happened here." So to get the number of responses we did from lots of people was really great to hear. "Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that. I remember that." And then for this story, we heard from one man who said, "I've got video of that."
Which is pretty unbelievable for 50 years ago.
Right. He emailed me and he said, "I have Super 8 video of that." And I know some people listening, myself included, when I first heard it, was like, "You're going to have to explain to me what Super 8 is," because that's a little bit before my time. And he came to the station and sat with me and showed me the camera that he shot it on, that he paid $300 for, used whenever he bought it, and laid out for me the whole tale of being able to shoot it, and shared some video with me as well.
$300 is a small fortune 50 years ago, too.
Especially when you're 18, 19 years old, as he was when he bought
Wow.
it. Yeah. He had saved up quite a bit to buy that camera.
So what did you think when you got to see this? It looked like something you would see in a documentary.
I said in the story, it looked like a mashup of a home movie and a crime movie is what it looked like. Being of a certain age, my home videos looked a little bit different than what these looked like, but it really I thought about, like, as funny as it is, I thought of Christmas Vacation, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, when Clark Griswold is sitting in the attic looking at the old home video. That's what some of this footage looks like. Not
the Wonder Years?
Not the old black and white stuff, because it's in color. It was shot in 1968, but just the look of the neighborhoods, it looks almost idyllic. And then you drop these plainclothes officers walking through with shotguns on their shoulders, and police officers unloading shotgun shells and that kind of thing. It's really, really kind of jarring to look at the first time you see it.
It's amazing how, and you see this when they've cleaned up even footage from World War II or something like that, how all of a sudden video makes you realize, it just makes it seem so real.
Sure. And the other part about this that's interesting, especially in our field, where we know all of us have been out on crime scene stories where the first thing we're told is where to stand with our camera, where to set up, where police are going to allow us to get. And where he is with this camera is so surprising. There's a shot that we showed in the story last night of a police officer, plainclothes detective, taking fingerprints off of a cigarette lighter from one of what they suspect was getaway cars. And I mean, his camera is right up on it. And this is just some kid. He was 18, 19 years old, and he's there with his camera. And it surprised me, because it feels almost like we're getting back to that now, where people who aren't in our profession are wandering around with cameras in their pockets all the time. And we see so many videos of, look at what this person caught because something happened. They decided to pick up their camera and start rolling on it. That's what he did. He did what we do now with cell phones if something interesting happens, except his camera was, much larger. And if you haven't seen the story yet and don't know what a Super 8 camera looked like, it's not an over-the-shoulder kind of thing. It's not the big VHS camera that some of us were raised with that our parents shot home video on. I'm trying to think of a size equivalent, but it's probably about a foot long by maybe 6-7 inches tall, I would say, and only maybe 2 or 3 inches wide. So he hold it up to his eye. There's a little handle on the front that he would hold it up to his eye, and it's not like rolling on a camera like this. It's he's able to press a little button and get it to record, but he's holding it up to his eye. So I can't imagine what the officers were even thinking when he's in the midst of all that, but he's just right down in the car, basically shooting some of this stuff as part of an investigation into a bombing, a bank robbery, and a shooting where a Kansas State trooper was killed. It's wild to look at and see what he was able to see.
Did you have any, is there still a piece to this mystery that you need answered that somebody out there might know?
That's a great question. We were never able to hear from many of we talked to one family member of one of the robbers. There were 4 people involved, 2 men, 2 women. I am 99% certain that all 4 of them have passed. I know both the men have died. I know one of the women has died. I'm pretty sure the 4th person has died. Karen Getz is the only person I was not able to independently confirm she had died. So if there's a person who's listening that says, yeah, I was related to Karen Getz, I'd be really interested in talking to you. We spoke to members of Bonnie Willane's family, the other female and the other woman involved. Both the men just died just a couple of years ago. And I talked to, there's on the original story, I didn't have him on the on-camera part, but there's some snippets on our website, kshb.com, of the lawyer for Henry Floyd Brown that met him that night, the night of in the hospital after he was shot with these guys, and he was assigned to it, and talking about that was a wild story. So there's not necessarily a missing piece anymore, but I actually exchanged emails today with someone who is the person who actually called in from the apartment and said, hey, I think I saw him. And he's the person that called and said, I recognize this car. And I went and sat and talked to him after the original story aired, and he showed me all kinds of documentation and stuff in the paper about how it was written. So I appreciate him sharing that with me. There's been lots and lots of people reach out. I had another person call and say, yeah, I've got some pictures from that day. And it's so many people, it kind of jogged their memory once we ran the story. But it's wild to think about that happened. So that's it for 41 Files today. Again, we want to thank Kat Reed for joining us by the phone. We want to thank Lindsay Shively for talking about Hyperloop, and Charlie Keegan for talking about the scariest corridor in the world. No, that's what we're laughing about this morning. But the corridor that he's got there in Jackson County with what's going on with the future of that. And again, I got a chance to talk to you more about the bank robbery story in Overland Park. We had so much reaction to. Thanks for that. Good time to remind you, we have several podcasts available from 41 Action News. Of course, 41 Files that you're listening to right now. Lindsay's podcast, Chew Diligence, all about the food scene in Kansas City. What's the next episode of that? When does it come out?
We just passed 2,500 downloads.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
And the next one is out. That comes out every week, every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks, and it comes out. Haley is also a lovely producer extraordinaire on that. The first, right?
Yes.
Next episode
Haley just
out
talked
the first.
on the microphone. You just got her to
I tricked her.
talking on the microphone. So
That's mean.
next Chew Diligence is out on the 1st. And then, of course, the 4th and 1 podcast for the Chiefs, which had got lots to talk about right now, and the team's as good as they are. Only lost 1 game all season, back-to-back primetime games, lots to listen to on 4th and 1. And then Screened on the Spot, our movie podcast. If you love movies, and the latest episode was about scary movies and Halloween that was just out, and their favorite scary movies to talk about. So if you're a movie buff, that's definitely worth a listen. So lots of great podcasts that we are able to produce here. We have fun doing them and sharing with you more about what you don't always get to hear on television for this 41 File. So thanks for listening, subscribing. Please tell your friends about it and continue to listen. Thanks so much.